Welcome everyone to this briefing brought to you by the Israel Defense and Security Forum, IDSF. In Hebrew, our name is Bitronistim. IDSF is the leading Israeli organization advocating for strong strategic national security-oriented policies. Our movement consists of more than 20,000 people here in Israel, including many reserve officers and operators from all branches of the Israel Defense establishment who believe that strong national security and staunch Zionism are necessary for Israel to be the eternal homeland of the Jewish people. Thank you, of course, to all of our viewers and supporters for tuning into these briefings. We have a very important briefing for you today. I am joined by Danny Seaman, former director of the government press office, and then a little bit later we're going to be hearing from Elie Pierpz, the director of IDSF's international affairs. He liaisons with the officials in the US government and many officials in Europe as well. So we have a couple of important things to discuss with Elie. But first, we're going to begin with Danny. And yesterday, we had on our briefing Or Yisachar, the head of our IDSF research, who started expressing how this conflict, this war in Gaza, is now expanding beyond the borders of Gaza. And we have Danny here to really elaborate on that idea. Please, Danny, take it away.
Okay, well, Or is right. And I think that those who watch us have been watching this for, 3 months already? We're almost going on 3 months. Realize that we focus on the Israeli side, but we've always said, and different people who've been appearing here have said that this is bigger than just Israel. And a lot of our viewers and a lot of the people who follow us, I think, know that it's not always about Israel. Israel's in the center of things. But when it has to do with Israel, the ramifications far beyond that. And we are seeing that so perfectly in the past few days. Now, when you go back to October, because of the intensity of what happened, it was clear that this was Israel. And because Israel is the focus of the essence of the Islamists, who are not shy and not hiding what they want to do. And when you look at the jihadist Islamists, and Iran is perhaps the greatest, but not the only one behind this movement, it's opposed to the West. And Israel represents the West here physically in the Middle East. So we're the first, obviously, the first one to encounter the wrath, if you want to call it, of the jihadists. And despite the fact that many people in the West want to ignore what the truth is and are trying to put this inside, and they give many excuses for what is going on, the jihadists themselves and the Islamists are not hiding it. They're saying they want to impose this on the entire Western world in this sense, because they are opposed and they want to spread Islam. So Israel is the first blocking stone for them. So you have this attack against Israel at that time, which was far beyond that, because every one of these groups here, whether it's the Hamas or the Hezbollah, the Houthis, the others, they're all, in a sense, supported by and directed by Iran. So what you have, especially in the past 24 to 48 hours, is you see these things developing now. Is Israel, it's not, by the way, we're not toning down, but we're focusing now on, and Amir has said this yesterday, Israel's focusing on the most important aspects of Gaza. We have not given up on the idea, which is to totally eliminate Hamas. This is something that the Israeli public, by the way, demand of the government. We're also encountering events with the Hezbollah in Lebanon. But yesterday you had an incident in Iran, and we start with that, because Iran is the center and the core of all these problems here. And you had an incident in Iran at the grave of Seaman, who was taken out by the United States 4 years ago, exactly yesterday. And you had over almost 200 people murdered there. Now, there's an Iranian, anti-government Iranian here in Israel right now at the moment. And he was speaking to some of us yesterday, and he said that what happened here on October 7th is exactly what the Iranians do to their own people. They use, and they instructed Hamas, who are a proxy of Iran, to use violence, to use rape, to use all these things that happened, and they use these same things against their own public. So what you saw yesterday was a suicide bombing, and there are tensions inside of Iran. There is opposition inside of Iran. And yesterday, some of the opposition forces, or some of the Iranians, are now saying this was probably done by the government in order to justify any actions they want to take against the opposition and also use against Israel. And very quickly, they pointed the finger at Israel. And Israel today did something very unusual. The government of Israel today reached out to all its allies in the United States, in Europe, and made it very clear to them that we had nothing to do with the event in Iran. Now this, if you want to compare that, then you see what happened in Lebanon day before yesterday, when one of the heads of Hamas was taken out in Lebanon. Israel remained silent. Israel wasn't saying anything. We made it very clear that every one of the Hamas leaders, anywhere at the world, regardless of where they are anymore, every single one of them, we say in Hebrew, damam berosham, meaning they're all going to be targeted by Israel eventually. Every last one of them who were part of the assault against Israel on October 7th will be eliminated by Israel at one point or the other. So despite that, we kept silent about what happened in Lebanon. So you see this, that we went and made an effort to inform our allies that we had nothing to do with what happened in Iran. Now, this doesn't mean that at one point or another, we won't have to address the issue with Iran, because eventually it's going to come down to this. But right now, Iran has its own problems. And by the way, these problems are going out throughout the Arab world. You can see this also with the Hezbollah. Hezbollah, who are Shia, are supported, of course, by the Shia in Iran, and they have Sunni enemies. And they are supporting the regime in Syria, because we have a lot of incidents going on with Syria at the moment. And you have Iranian proxies from Iraq and from Afghanistan who moved into Syria to support the effort against Israel. But they have opposition inside of Syria, because the Syrian regime, which are a minority government of Alawites, who are supported by the Shia in Iran. So you're seeing this as a greater picture of what is going on here right now, that you see the Iranian involvement, and it all comes down to the Iranian or to the Shia-Sunni conflict. And so Hezbollah has been cautious not to be drawn in to this, though they have participated. You had today, we informed that officially there are 181 Hezbollah casualties in this conflict with Israel at the moment. But they've been very cautious to take this to the next level, not only because of Israel, and they know what Israel is capable of doing, but because they also have enemies inside of Lebanon who are opposed to them, and especially inside of Syria, who have made it very clear. The moment Hezbollah turns against Israel, or this goes to a full-fledged war, they're joining in, not with Israel, but definitely against Hezbollah. And the third aspect of this is something we've been more familiar with, has been with the Houthis in Seaman, in Yemen, and made it very clear, the United States made it very clear what their intentions are, and have kept it at that. Well, I think Elie will talk about this more in a moment.
Danny, can I ask a question on that? You know, sure. the old adage, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Who is the great enemy in the Middle East that these countries would all support? Is Israel the enemy, or are you saying potentially Iran or Hezbollah is the bigger threat, and Israel could almost take a backseat?
Well, if you take the extreme Islam element, the jihadist Islamists who want to have Islam spread around the world, and they're not hiding that, by the way, if you listen to imams in Chicago, in London, in Beirut, in Berlin, in other places, they're making it very clear. That is their goal. They've been incorporated into these countries, but they want to put Sharia law in control of these countries. So that is the first enemy. But even within Islam, there are those who are not, and there's conflict. The major conflict is between the Sunni and the Shia. So that is the greatest conflict going on inside of the Arab country, the Arab world. So here is where we have to look at who they they know Israel is not one of them. You know, the enemy of all of them are the Israelis, but for Islam itself, the greatest problem is the Shia-Sunni conflict that has been going on, and they see them as a greater enemy because they see eventually, despite all the propaganda coming out, Israel's not looking to occupy these Arab countries. It's not looking to impose itself upon these other Arab countries. So they understand that very clearly. They may not say this, and the propaganda that you get out there is Israel is this expansionist element, but that's they're more concerned with Iran and the Shia threat than they are for the Sunni, at least, than they are of Israel. So just to wrap this up, then you have the Houthis, and then you come down to Gaza. As I said, it may appear that we took a step back, but we haven't. The effort inside of Gaza continues. In Khan Yunis today, we had a large number of the Nukhba. Nukhba are those who were personally involved in the assault on October 7th, and they made it very clear what their intentions were that day. About 8 of them were taken by Israel today in one of these tunnels. The activities is going on by Israel, and we're being very secretive about this, about what exactly is happening, not to reveal some of the tactics and things. I think Amir referred to this yesterday, but this has been successful, and they confirmed today, after being questioned on the ground there, that at least several of the heads of Hamas have been taken out in recent attacks in these tunnels in the areas we're battling at the moment in the Gaza Strip. So Gaza is becoming less of an issue right now, and Israel, and today the chief of the Minister of Defense made it very clear that we are giving the diplomatic effort right now with the Hezbollah, so not to be drawn into a conflict there, but we're giving them a very limited amount of time. This is said by the Minister of Defense today. We'll give it a time, we'll give it an effort, but we're not going to give it forever. And eventually, because of the threat that Hezbollah poses to Israel, and because of their involvement right now with the Hamas, it is a threat. And people forget, we have 200,000 displaced Israelis. Nobody talks about this. 200,000 displaced Israelis, many of them from the north of Israel, because of the threat from Hezbollah, and we're going to have to rid that. If it can't be done diplomatically and quickly, Israel will do that. So that's where we stand right now with the events here in the Middle East.
Thank you so much, Danny. We're going to go now to Elie Pierpz, who is with us. Elie is the Director of International Affairs for IDSF and does a lot of work in the U.S. and the European governments and the U.S. government. And many of our viewers have been asking Elie over the past week if we could speak a bit towards the fact that the U.S. is taking the USS Gerald Ford aircraft carrier out of the Mediterranean and back to U.S. waters. What can you share with us about that?
Thank you very much, Moshe. A pleasure to be here. I would say just overall, when it comes to the U.S., it is critical to understand that the U.S. is Israel's ally and friend. However, we fundamentally see this war extremely different. They are focused on achieving a temporary or even a premature peace with the hope that afterwards they can accomplish whatever needs to be accomplished diplomatically. On the other hand, in Israel, we're focused on simply defeating our enemies. And I think when you have that understanding, it helps you to see why a move taking a very large aircraft carrier, and the armada that comes along with it, and then says that we're going to return it to the U.S. They're going to leave the field of battle. Why is the U.S. doing it? Moves like that are not telegraphed completely. They could be, they may not be doing exactly what they have announced. Sometimes there is a little bit of subterfuge, but for the most part, the sense is that the U.S. is trying to signal that they want to lower the temperature. They understand right now there is a real chance that we could see the northern front becoming much hotter and becoming to a full-fledged war. For the last few months, Israel has been significantly damaging Hezbollah. How much? Hard to say. We're in the middle of the war right now. In response, we have evacuated our civilians, and we have had a number of casualties up north. But for the most part, they haven't really been able to damage us. While the damage that we've been able to do up north has been quite significant. The possibility with the assassination that's been attributed to Israel in Lebanon earlier this week. But the possibility of things expanding, frankly, exploding, is very much there. Israel's made it very clear that unless Hezbollah retreats to become in compliance of UN Resolution 1701, which mandated that the area south of the Litani River, roughly 15 to 40 kilometers, depending on where exactly from the Israeli border, that has to be a military-free zone. And Hezbollah has spent the last couple of decades doing quite the opposite. Unless they retreat, that there will be a war. Because frankly, there is no way that Israel could stomach the idea of having Hezbollah that close to our border, and frankly, to be able to accomplish an October 7th, but not on the southern border, on the northern border. So when it comes to the US moves, all they are focused on right now is how do we avoid a conflict expanding. As you could see from the American approach to Afghanistan, we saw in the previous administration, which is 2 previous administrations ago, which was the Obama-Biden administration, which is largely the same people as making up this administration. They set up a red line in Syria. They refused to enforce it because they didn't want to bring in American forces into the region. We see that really pretty much until October 7th, and I wouldn't be shocked if it's been going on since then. The US continues to negotiate in some ways informally with the Iranian enemy right now, because all they want to do is they want to try to accomplish a nuclear deal. All of that signals a tremendous amount of weakness, but a real focus, which is very different than Israel's. And Israel, at a certain point, was willing to put up with it. At this point, they're no longer willing to put up with it. And as of now, we are going ahead and we are focusing on our effort to defeat our enemies completely. Certainly in the south and in the north, we are, we have made it clear. I think we made it relatively clear as far as what we need in order for us to feel a certain sense of security. And America sees it differently. But even with having said all that, it is important to appreciate, and I'm sure that General Avivi has expressed this in the past, one of the reasons why Iran thought that this was the right time to attack us on October 7th is that on October 7th, there was a sense that the US and Israel there was daylight, to quote the Obama administration. There was daylight between the US and Israel, and that erodes our deterrence. As a result, it's critical for Israel right now and the US to show that we are aligned, we are working together, even if there are differences, and that those differences can be said a little more quietly. But when it comes back to your original question, Moshe, how do we interpret the US moving the Gerald Ford out of the region? We interpret it as the US wants to demonstrate to our enemies that they are moving back. They are trying to de-escalate and hoping that will have a positive impact of a general de-escalation for the entire conflict between Israel and Hamas, Israel and Hezbollah, Israel and the Houthis, and Israel and Iran. I don't think that's going to be a successful strategy, but that seems to be the one that the US is taking.
Thank you, because many people, many of our viewers have assumed that the US basically is pulling back their support on Israel, and they had a certain period of deployment, and now they're bringing their troops home. But what you're saying very clearly is that it's a strategic move on their part, maybe not a strategic move everyone in Israel agrees with, but it's a strategy. It's not just that some timer ran out and now they have to pull the troops back.
Right. It's consistent with the American approach, and frankly, the U.S. is replacing the Gerald Ford with smaller, more nimbler warships that will have Marines that potentially could do some sort of amphibious landings. Hard to imagine what that really could mean. I don't see the Marines attacking Hezbollah in Lebanon, so I'm not sure if that's really relevant. I think the bigger threat is that the international community really hasn't responded effectively to the Houthis. And I think that in general is just encouraging the Iranians to do more and more. They will continue attacking through their proxies. which frankly is an approach of the Iranians where they don't care very much about Arabs. They are Persians. They see them very different. So the Arabs who are their proxies are expendable, and they're happy to send them to the front lines, happy to have a number of them die, and that's perfectly fine with the Iranian regime.
You mentioned the international community, and we always focus on what support is U.S. providing Israel. Are you able to speak a little bit about European countries? Are there European countries providing military support for Israel during this war?
Great question. Most of the European countries are, when it comes to that, they keep themselves relatively quiet for two reasons. Partially because, as we saw on October 8th, the amount of pro-Hamas sentiment in all of their all their capital cities, they all have allowed in a tremendous amount of Muslims, Arabs primarily, as refugees from the Syrian war. And it's had a very significant and frankly very negative impact on the climate in those countries. So they're not looking to highlight their more engagement with Israel. But there's another reason, and it's also because there is a big conflict going on in the European continent, and they also need a lot of weapons. And weapons that are going to Israel is going to be seen by many as weapons that could have gone to Zelensky in Ukraine. And that's also something where each country decides how they want to help Israel, how they want to help Ukraine, if that's what they choose to do. They don't always want to telegraph exactly what they're doing. Listen, most European countries have largely, limited and have a much smaller military budget than the U.S. does. They've relied heavily on NATO. Which now with the experience of Ukraine, they understand that's not nearly enough. And many countries are now ramping up their ability to protect themselves. But as of now, there are things that are being done that I'm relatively sure of, that I can say. But as far as which countries are helping the most, many you can see with some diplomatic things. I wouldn't say Switzerland is a country that's giving weapons, but in Switzerland, there was an effort to try to remove remove funding from UNRWA. Now, it hasn't gone through completely, but there are these elements which we never really saw too many pro-Israel movements in the European political environment. We see quite a bit right now that's supporting Israel. Understand that Hamas is not merely a threat to Israel, but that Hamas' big brother Iran is a threat to the stabilization of Europe as well.
It's of course great to hear that there's more than what we read in the headlines, and there are European countries helping out. Danny, I see you unmute yourself. What can you share with us?
I know, I'm just in case you asked a question. I know there are a lot of questions people are asking here. If we want to address that, I'm ready.
Nothing specific. Okay, so let me ask you both a question in terms of the politics in the U.S. and what the White House and people running for re-election care about. What issues with regards to this war in Gaza or the future of Israel is an issue that will resonate with lawmakers in the U.S.? That's a question for either of you.
Elie.
I would say that, when it comes to the U.S. and comes to the elections, more significant than lawmakers, it's the general public. And I'll say, I think the issue that's going to resonate the most with the general public as we come to the election in November is the anti-Semitism that is rampant throughout the U.S. Obviously, there was the hearings in Congress dealing with what the code of ethics say in the Ivy League schools and the response that it got. I think that's something that very much resonates and shows that the conflict, which happened very, very far away from the U.S., actually is, to a certain extent, is still happening on their own streets. You look at the streets, I saw videos in Teaneck, New Jersey, of pro-Palestinian, having a whole parade going to Teaneck and trying to intimidate Jews. I think that is a thing that's going to really engage and connect with the American public. And I think that will have a very significant influence on the elections. The war itself will have as well. But as I was just earlier, I was talking about Europe. Europe has elections in June, where the entire European Parliament and a number of countries do as well. This is going to be a significant issue. We've seen just in the last few weeks, there have been a number of elections since October 7th. Both those major elections we had in Argentina, surprise win by the new president is someone who has said clearly that he wants to move his embassy to Jerusalem, as has the new prime minister or the one who won the election in Amsterdam. I'm sorry, in Holland. They have, he hasn't formed his government yet. The one who won the election is extremely pro-Israel, and I think there is a real sense, not necessarily of pro-Israel, but of the fear of what the alternative is. And I think that's something that will permeate elections in Europe and will permeate elections in the States.
I see somebody's asking about the International Court of Justice. I can say for Moshe here that I know that we're going to be addressing that in our briefings later on this week. But I just want to add on to something that Elie said about the elections and the attitudes towards Israel. Again, I see somebody asks here about the fact that Americans don't want to spend money. I think it's important that people realize that what we're seeing now is an event of modern warfare. And Israel is allied with the United States, both with its Central Command, if that's what it's called, if I remember correctly, and certainly with the NATO. There are a lot of joint maneuvers and things happening. Everything that we learn in this battle here is shared with the United States. Any of you involved with business understands how important R&D is. And for that effect, for many years, and one of the reasons the US military, at least, I don't know so much about the State Department, but certainly the American military and the defense establishment understands how beneficial Israel is to the interests of the United States. The fact that we have on-the-ground experience, and unfortunately, it's sad to say that anything we go through, the United States and Europe have learned that eventually it ends up on their front door, and their troops have to be involved in this as well. So please remember that anything happening here eventually is then brought to the not only the attention, but also help save American lives and European and NATO lives, because all the experience that we gather right now fighting in these tunnels and fighting against these terrorist organizations and against these proxies that are directed by Iran, everything here is invaluable to the fact you couldn't put a price on it. And there's also a reason why the United States is assisting us with the ammunitions, because they know that these battles and everything that we get from out of this will eventually be shared and brought to the ability of the United States. And then the Americans have the abilities that no other country in the world has of translating this into technology and abilities that will protect not only the United States, but the Western world. And this is what the battle is. The essence of the battle, as I started the conversation, is not only about Israel, and it's not only an international conflict, it's between the West and those elements in the East, which are supported by China and also Russia, and certainly, in simple terms, a battle of good versus evil.
Danny, Elie, thank you so much for joining this briefing. Thank you for sharing your expertise with our viewers. We have a great program lined up for next week, so everyone should tune back in Monday, 10 a.m. Eastern Time. We are going to be joined by Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus, the IDF spokesperson, so please make sure to join us next week. Until then, stay safe, stay strong, take care, everyone.